I never imagined I'd be here, holding secrets that feel so heavy they could break me. The weight of them presses on my heart in quiet moments, in the stillness of dawn when I wake next to my husband, Daniel, and realize that a piece of me, one I've kept hidden for too long, has slipped somewhere beyond his reach. There's someone else. But it wasn't supposed to be like this. It never felt like an affair, not in the beginning. It felt like slipping into something soft and familiar, something that had always been there, lingering at the edges of my life, waiting for me to acknowledge it. His name is Alex, my friend from childhood, and he's known me longer than anyone, including Daniel. Alex and I grew up next door to each other. Our days spent exploring the woods behind our houses, or building makeshift forts, creating an entire world known only to us. He was there through every scraped knee, every adolescent heartbreak, every milestone that molded me into the person I am now. There was always something warm and safe in our friendship, something so comforting that it felt inevitable we would always be close, even as we grew up, as we found love, and as life led us down different paths. Years passed. I married Daniel, and Alex married too, though his marriage ended in a quiet, mutual separation after a few years. I always felt sadness for him when he told me about the divorce, the hurt lurking in his voice no matter how casually he tried to tell me. He came back into my life more closely afterward, always needing a friend, a confidant, someone to fill that empty place where his love had once been. Our connection was something I treasured, something I thought could remain innocent. But I didn't understand then how delicate boundaries can be when old friends share the kind of history we do. I didn't understand that love, or maybe something even deeper than love, had been lying dormant between us all these years. The first time I felt it, the first time I let myself acknowledge that there might be more between us than friendship, was at one of those rare, unexpected moments that leaves a mark. We were sitting on my back porch late one evening, laughing about old memories, about our silly teenage crushes, when he looked at me with an intensity that made my laughter stop. His gaze lingered on my face, searching, as though he was seeing something he hadn't let himself notice before. "I missed this," he said quietly. "I missed us." It was such a simple confession, but it made my heart thud in a way I couldn't explain. I forced a smile, but I could feel something shift in that moment, something that left me both excited and frightened. The closeness between us had always been easy, but now I could feel tension creeping in, a tension that was both familiar and startlingly new. We didn't cross any lines that night, nor did we talk about it again, but that unspoken truth lingered between us. I started thinking about him more often, noticing details about him that had always been there but had never felt this magnetic. The way his eyes would soften when he looked at me, the way his hand felt warm and solid when he'd briefly rested on my shoulder, or how his laughter lit up the entire room. Little things really, but they started filling spaces in me that I hadn't realized were empty. Months passed and our connection deepened in small, almost imperceptible ways. I would tell Daniel I was going out to catch up with Alex, and he would barely look up from his work, nodding as if it was the most normal thing in the world. Part of me was relieved that he trusted me so completely. Another part of me felt guilty. I started questioning everything. How could I be falling for Alex after all these years? What did this mean for my marriage? One evening, after too many glasses of wine, Alex and I found ourselves talking about what could have been if life had turned out differently. I listened as he talked about how he used to feel about me, how he'd always thought we'd end up together somehow but had accepted that it wasn't meant to be. His words lingered in the air, and I felt my heart race with a strange mixture of nostalgia and longing. "Did you ever think about us?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. I swallowed hard, my pulse pounding in my ears. "Sometimes," I admitted, barely able to meet his eyes. In that moment, something changed irrevocably between us. We both knew the truth, even if we didn't dare speak it fully. I tried to push away the feelings that surged in me, tried to convince myself that I could manage this without crossing any boundaries. But the truth was I was already emotionally crossing them. After that, I couldn't shake the thought of him. Every glance, every laugh, every memory between us started to feel like something forbidden and sweet, something that was growing beyond my control. I would come home to Daniel, and every moment I spent with him was a reminder of my divided heart. I loved my husband, of that I was certain, but this connection with Alex was something I didn't understand, something that made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. There were times I tried to distance myself to create space between us, but it never lasted. He would text me a simple message like, "Miss my friend," and my resolve would crumble. I couldn't bear the thought of losing him, of severing the bond that felt like it had been part of me since childhood. The guilt gnawed at me, but so did the longing, an ache that only grew stronger with each passing day. I couldn't bring myself to tell Daniel, to break his heart when he'd done nothing to deserve it. So I lived in this fractured reality, with a part of me deeply, irrevocably in love with my husband, and another part lost in the quiet intensity of my oldest friend. In the end, I still don't know if I will ever be able to make a choice, or if I even need to. But what I do know is that some love stories are never meant to be simple. They are tangled, layered things that grow over years, and sometimes lifetimes, and they don't let go easily. I carry these secrets not because I want to hurt anyone, but because they're a part of me. These fragments of love and friendship, desire and loyalty that live in the spaces between my past and my present. And maybe one day I'll find a way to make peace with them. But until then, I am left with my secrets, the memories of a friendship that was always something more, and a love I can never fully reveal. After that night when Alex asked if I'd ever thought of us, I found myself haunted by the moments that replayed endlessly in my mind. That one question, spoken softly and almost wistfully, had rooted itself somewhere deep, like a persistent ache that couldn't be soothed. I tried to shake it off, convinced myself that it was a phase, a fluke of nostalgia or an illusion brought on by the years we'd shared. But it wasn't a fluke and it wasn't nostalgia. In the weeks that followed, I noticed everything. The subtle shifts in our conversations, the new kind of tension that colored his words and echoed in mine. When we'd meet for coffee or go for walks, it felt like walking a tightrope, both thrilling and terrifying. Every laugh, every lingering glance. It was as if we were both towing a line we didn't dare cross. Alex's gaze would linger just a bit too long, his hand brushing mine with a tenderness that felt charged. We didn't speak of that night again, but we didn't need to. The question hung between us, pulsing beneath every smile, every shared laugh. And all the while, I returned home to Daniel, carrying these pieces of my heart that felt as though they didn't belong entirely to either man. One Friday evening, Daniel suggested we throw a small gathering at our home, a chance to catch up with friends we hadn't seen in ages. He'd been noticing that I'd seemed distracted lately, though he didn't press me on why. "Maybe a little time with friends will be good for us," he'd said, his hand resting warmly on my shoulder. And he was right. Maybe seeing others, maybe filling our home with laughter and warmth, would break this spell that Alex seemed to have cast over me. I invited Alex, partly because not inviting him would have been suspicious to Daniel, but also because, despite everything, I couldn't imagine keeping him away. That evening, as the house filled with voices and music, I caught glimpses of Alex from across the room. My heart tugged painfully every time our eyes met, each glance feeling loaded with words we'd never spoken. He looked at me as if he knew every secret I was hiding, every quiet thought, and my resolve felt more fragile than ever. The evening drifted on, conversations flowing easily, friends sharing stories, and wine making everyone a little more relaxed, a little more open. I was talking with a friend in the kitchen when I felt a presence beside me. I knew it was Alex even before I turned around. He smiled down at me, that easy, familiar smile that had once felt so innocent. Now it only reminded me of how much had changed. We spoke in low voices, sharing little jokes about the people around us, making observations about how different everyone seemed since we were kids. It felt safe, familiar, like old times, until he leaned a bit closer, his voice soft in my ear. "I don't think I've ever told you how beautiful you look tonight," he whispered. The words were innocent enough, but the way he said them, the way his eyes softened as he looked at me, stirred a quiet chaos inside me. I felt my face warm, the intensity of his gaze almost too much to bear. For a moment it felt as if we were the only ones in the room, as if the entire world had fallen away, leaving just the two of us standing there, balancing on that fragile line we kept flirting with. I forced a laugh, hoping it would diffuse the tension, but his eyes remained on me, unwavering. "You always knew how to flatter me, Alex," I managed to say, though my voice sounded shaky even to my own ears. "It's not flattery if it's true," he replied, and the words hung between us, heavy and unspoken. I looked away, my gaze falling on Daniel, who was laughing with a friend across the room. Guilt churned in my stomach, sharp and bitter. What was I doing? How had I let myself get here? Caught between the comfort of a familiar friendship and the life I'd built with my husband. But just as I thought I might pull away, put an end to this dangerous game, I felt Alex's hand brush against mine. The touch was brief, a barely there graze of skin, but it sent a shiver through me. I glanced up at him and for a moment I saw something raw in his eyes, something vulnerable. And I realized with a sinking heart that he was feeling all of this too. The years of friendship, the unspoken words, the memories we shared. It was all there, simmering just beneath the surface, waiting for one of us to be brave enough to reach out and claim it. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I tried to focus on Daniel, on my friends, but my thoughts kept drifting back to Alex, to the silent conversation we'd been having all night. When he finally left, the emptiness he left behind felt palpable, as though a piece of me had walked out the door with him. I lay awake that night, Daniel's arm draped over me, his breathing soft and steady beside me, while my heart ached with a longing I couldn't name. Days passed, each one feeling heavier than the last. I tried to shake the feelings, to remind myself of my marriage, my life, the vows I'd made. But Alex was always there, in the corners of my mind, a constant presence that I couldn't ignore. We didn't talk much after that night, both of us seeming to understand that whatever was happening between us needed space, needed silence. But silence can be dangerous. In the absence of his words, I found myself remembering the way he'd looked at me, the warmth in his eyes, the quiet intensity that had always been there, simmering just beneath the surface. It felt as though I was living in two worlds, the life I shared with Daniel, and this other life, this shadowed existence that was defined by secrets and stolen glances and feelings I couldn't put into words. Finally, one afternoon, Alex texted me, asking if we could meet. I stared at the message, my heart pounding. I knew deep down that this was a choice. If I went to him, if I let this conversation happen, there would be no going back. And yet, despite everything, despite the guilt and the fear and the uncertainty, I found myself typing a simple one-word reply. Yes. We met at a small, quiet cafe on the edge of town, the kind of place where no one would recognize us, where we could be just two people sharing a coffee on an ordinary afternoon. But as I sat across from him, the weight of everything we weren't saying filled the air between us. He looked at me with that same quiet intensity, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. I can't keep doing this, he finally said, his voice low, almost a whisper. Seeing you, pretending this is just friendship. It's not, and we both know it. My heart pounded, my hands trembling as I looked down at the table, unable to meet his gaze. Alex, we can't. I'm married. I love Daniel. I know, he said, a hint of pain in his voice. I know, and I don't want to hurt you. But I also know that I can't keep pretending I don't feel this way. I've loved you for years and I can't keep hiding it. The words broke something inside me, something I'd been holding onto for so long. I felt tears prickling at the corners of my eyes, my heart aching with a mixture of guilt and longing. I wanted to tell him that I loved him too, that I'd always loved him, even if I'd never admitted it to myself. But the words felt dangerous, as though saying them out loud would make them real, make them impossible to take back. I don't know what to do, I whispered, my voice barely audible. He reached across the table, his hand finding mine, his touch warm and steady. You don't have to do anything, he said softly. Just let me be here. Let me be a part of your life, even if it can't be in the way I want. I'd rather have you this way than not at all. And in that moment, I realized that maybe love doesn't always fit neatly into the boxes we create for it. Maybe some love stories are meant to remain unfulfilled, hidden in the quiet spaces of our hearts, lingering as secrets that we carry with us. I don't know what the future holds, or if I'll ever be able to let go of Alex completely. But for now, I hold on to these moments, these memories, and the bittersweet knowledge that some loves are too powerful to be forgotten, even if they can never be fully lived. As we parted that day, I felt the weight of his hand slip from mine, the absence leaving a hollow ache that I knew would never fade. I returned home to Daniel, to the life we'd built together, carrying with me the memory of Alex, the boy I'd loved since childhood, and the man who would forever hold a piece of my heart. Returning home to Daniel that night, I felt as if I were carrying a fragile secret wrapped around my heart. Every inch of my mind and soul was aching, torn between two men, one who had been there all my life, an unspoken, constant thread woven through every experience, and the other who shared my days and my dreams, who wore the ring on my finger that bound us together. The memory of Alex's touch, his gaze, lingered with me as if he had somehow left an indelible mark, one I couldn't just shake off no matter how hard I tried. I wanted to move past it. I wanted to go back to who I'd been before this line had blurred, before Alex's love and my own buried feelings had clawed their way to the surface. But with each day I realized that ignoring it didn't make it fade. Instead, it just became something I carried quietly, a weight that settled into my bones. Daniel was kind, attentive, and unaware of my inner turmoil. He'd become so accustomed to my friendship with Alex that he rarely questioned it. In the evenings he'd ask how my day had been if I'd seen Alex, and I'd answer with the usual stories, leaving out the guilt, the longing, and all the words that felt too dangerous to say out loud. But Daniel was perceptive, even if he didn't press me. I could tell he sensed that something was different, that I wasn't fully there, lost in thoughts I couldn't share. One quiet night as we were lying in bed, Daniel turned to me, his voice soft but steady. "You've seemed distracted lately," he said, his hand resting gently on mine. "Is something going on, Liz?" My heart caught in my throat. I could feel my pulse thundering as I scrambled for words, trying to find something that would soothe him, that would hide the truth I wasn't ready to face myself. "No," I managed to say, forcing a smile. "I think I've just been a bit overwhelmed. Work's been stressful, and maybe I haven't been sleeping well." He nodded slowly, accepting my answer but still looking at me with a hint of concern. "If there's anything you need to talk about, you know I'm here, right?" I nodded, feeling a pang of guilt twist inside me. Daniel had always been that way, steady, supportive, the one I could count on. He had loved me unconditionally, and here I was, holding on to a secret that I knew would hurt him deeply if he ever found out. I told myself I could manage it, that I could find a way to keep both relationships intact, to be the friend Alex needed and the wife Daniel deserved. But the longer I held on to this lie, the more it felt like it was slipping through my fingers. Alex and I didn't talk about our feelings again after that day at the cafe. He seemed to understand that I needed space, that I was still trying to make sense of what we'd admitted to each other. But even without words, the tension remained, a constant, quiet presence in my life. I would see him every so often, catching up over coffee or going for a walk, and though we kept our conversations light, I could feel the weight of everything we weren't saying pressing down on us. His gaze would linger, his smile just a little sadder, and I knew he felt the same ache I did, the same pull that refused to go away. It was during one of these afternoons that things finally shifted again. We had met at the park, sitting on a bench beneath the dappled shade of a large oak tree. The air was warm, filled with the scent of summer, and for a while we just sat in silence watching the world go by. It was a comfortable silence, one that reminded me of all the years we'd spent together, all the memories we'd shared. But this time there was something else lingering between us, something that neither of us could ignore any longer. "Liz," he said after a long pause, his voice barely above a whisper, "I think maybe it's better if we don't see each other for a while." The words hit me like a punch to the chest. I turned to him, my heart racing, a sense of panic clawing at me. "What? Why?" He looked away, his gaze fixed on the ground, his expression pained. "Because I don't want to hurt you. And I don't want you to have to choose between me and the life you've built with Daniel. I never wanted that. But the way things are now, it feels like we're both holding on to something that's only going to cause more pain." I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, the thought of losing him tearing at me in a way I hadn't anticipated. I wanted to argue, to tell him that we could make this work, that we could find a way to stay in each other's lives without causing more hurt. But as I looked at him, I realized that he was right. Holding on to him, to this love that had only grown over the years, was tearing me apart, leaving me divided in a way that felt impossible to reconcile. "Maybe you're right," I said softly, my voice trembling. "Maybe some things just aren't meant to be." He nodded, a flicker of sadness crossing his face. "I'll always love you, Liz. And if things were different, if life had turned out another way, I think we would have had something incredible." I couldn't hold back the tears any longer. I looked away, letting them fall silently, feeling the ache of goodbye settle into my heart. He reached over, his hand finding mine, and for a moment we just sat there, holding on to each other, both of us unwilling to let go. It felt like the end of something beautiful, something that had been ours for so long, even if it had only lived in the quiet spaces between friendship and love. When we finally parted, I walked away feeling hollow, as though I had left a piece of myself behind. The days that followed were a blur of quiet sorrow and regret. I threw myself into my life with Daniel, focusing on our routines, on the small moments we shared, trying to drown out the ache that lingered just beneath the surface. I told myself that it would fade with time, that eventually Alex would become a memory, a bittersweet piece of my past that I would carry with me, but one that wouldn't haunt me forever. But healing didn't come easily. Every once in a while I would catch a glimpse of something. A song on the radio, a place we used to go, even a certain scent on the breeze, and I would feel that old ache resurface sharp and relentless. I knew that Alex was still out there living his life, and that he was likely feeling the same pain, the same loss. And yet I had no choice but to keep going, to move forward with the life I'd chosen. Over time, Daniel began to notice that something was different. He didn't press me, but there were moments when he would look at me with a quiet sadness, as though he sensed the distance between us but didn't know how to bridge it. I tried to reassure him, to tell him that I loved him, that nothing had changed, but even as I said the words, I knew they weren't entirely true. Something had changed, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't make it go back to the way it had been before. Months passed, and slowly the ache began to dull. I found myself smiling more easily, laughing with Daniel, finding joy in the life we'd built together. But a part of me would always feel incomplete, as though there was a piece of my heart that had been carved out, leaving a space that no one else could fill. I realized that some loves were meant to be left unfinished, to live on as quiet secrets in the corners of our minds, shaping us in ways we could never fully understand. In the end, I learned to live with the quiet ache, to carry it with me as a reminder of the love I had shared with Alex, a love that had been beautiful and fragile and fleeting. It became a part of who I was, a part of the story I carried with me, hidden in the quiet spaces between my memories and my present. And though it hurt, though it left a scar that would never fully heal, I found peace in knowing that some things, some loves, are meant to remain as they are, untouched, unspoken, a whispered memory of something that could have been. And so I let go. Slowly, painfully, but with a quiet strength that I hadn't known I possessed. I let go of the dreams, the what-ifs, the lingering glances and unspoken words. I let go of the love that had grown between us, hidden and beautiful, until all that remained were memories, sweet, painful, and forever etched into my heart. And as I moved forward, I knew that I would carry Alex with me, a part of me forever, even if he was no longer a part of my life. Some secrets are meant to be kept. Some loves are meant to be unfinished. And some people leave marks on our souls that can never be erased, no matter how much time passes or how far we drift apart. In the quiet weeks that followed, I felt my life settle back into its familiar rhythms, but I couldn't shake the sense that something essential had shifted. Alex was no longer a regular presence, no longer the friend I could call or meet on a whim, but the memories of our friendship, and of something more, stayed with me. I thought about him in the smallest, most unexpected moments. When a certain song played on the radio, or when I'd see a couple laughing together in a way that spoke of a closeness and history that ran deep. Each time I felt that familiar pang, like a soft bruise beneath my ribs that hadn't fully healed. Daniel noticed my quietness, though he rarely commented. He would occasionally reach for my hand, or surprise me with little gestures, as if trying to bridge a gap he could sense but didn't understand. Part of me wanted to tell him everything, to release the weight of the secret that hung between us, but the fear of hurting him held me back. I couldn't bear the thought of watching the trust in his eyes shatter, of him looking at me and seeing not the wife he'd loved for years, but a stranger carrying a hidden life he hadn't known existed. One evening, several months after I'd last seen Alex, I came across an old photo album while cleaning out a cabinet. It was filled with pictures from my childhood, images of family vacations, birthday parties, school plays. I turned the pages slowly, smiling at the memories, until I came to a photo that stopped me cold. It was a picture of Alex and me, no older than 7 or 8, sitting together on the front steps of my childhood home. We were both grinning, his arms slung casually around my shoulders, our expressions carefree and full of joy. I traced my finger over the image, feeling a deep ache as I remembered how simple things had been back then, how natural it had felt to be by his side, as though we were meant to grow up and experience everything together. As I closed the album, I felt a swell of emotions: grief for the innocence we'd lost, for the friendship we'd complicated with unspoken feelings, and for the path my life had taken, pulling me away from him. I realized then that maybe part of growing up was learning to let go, to make peace with the chapters of our lives that couldn't be rewritten. But even as I thought this, I knew there was a part of me that would never fully let go of Alex, that would carry him with me in a quiet, unspoken way. In the days that followed, I found myself turning more deeply toward my life with Daniel, trying to focus on the love we shared, the life we had built together. I made an effort to be more present, to show him the appreciation he deserved, to remind myself of the reasons I had fallen in love with him in the first place. I cooked his favorite meals, planned little outings for us, and found myself laughing with him in ways that felt almost like old times. But no matter how much I tried, there was still a hollow part of me that I couldn't ignore, a part that felt irrevocably changed by the love I had never fully let myself feel with Alex. Months turned into a year and then two. Life continued in its predictable patterns, the quiet, familiar routines that Daniel and I had created over the years. Our relationship grew in new ways as we navigated the small challenges of life together. Work stress, family obligations, financial decisions. We became partners in a truer sense, relying on each other in ways that felt deep and lasting, even if they lacked the spark that had once been there. I learned to accept that love could be both a comfort and a compromise, that sometimes the stability of companionship was enough. But every so often, when Daniel was asleep beside me or when I was alone with my thoughts, I felt that old ache return. I would think of Alex, of the life we might have had, and wonder if he ever thought of me. I wondered if he too felt the weight of what we'd left behind, if he carried the same quiet longing that had become a part of me. But I knew that reaching out would only reopen old wounds, that whatever we'd shared had to remain in the past, a part of my story that lived only in my memories. Then one late autumn evening, a letter arrived in the mail, a simple envelope with familiar handwriting scrawled across it. My heart skipped a beat as I recognized Alex's handwriting, my fingers trembling as I tore open the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, his words written in a careful, familiar script. "Liz," he wrote, "I know we said goodbye, and I meant it when I said I didn't want to complicate your life. But as time passes, I find myself thinking about you more, wondering if maybe we gave up something we weren't meant to let go of. I don't want to disrupt your life. I just wanted you to know that you're still with me, that there's a part of me that will always love you, even if it's only from a distance. I hope you're happy. I hope you found peace. And if you ever find yourself wondering, just know that I'm here." The letter was simple, unassuming, yet it hit me with a force I hadn't anticipated. I reread his words over and over, feeling a mix of longing and sadness, a sense of what might have been. I wanted to reply, to tell him that I felt the same, that he was still a part of me in ways I couldn't explain. But I knew that doing so would only stir up emotions we had both worked so hard to bury. So I tucked the letter away in a drawer, telling myself that it was enough to know he hadn't forgotten me, that he still carried a part of me with him, just as I carried him. As the years passed, life continued to unfold in its steady, quiet way. Daniel and I grew older together, facing the inevitable challenges that came with time. Health scares, career changes, the loss of loved ones. Our bond deepened in ways that were hard to describe, rooted in a shared history that felt solid and enduring. I learned to find contentment in the small moments we shared, the quiet, ordinary routines that had come to define our life together. Yet, no matter how much time passed, there was always a part of me that remained connected to Alex, a small hidden piece of my heart that belonged to him alone. I thought of him often, wondering if he had moved on, if he had found someone who could fill the space I had left behind. And though I never heard from him again, I felt his presence in my life, a quiet, unspoken reminder of the love that had once existed between us. In the end, I came to understand that some loves are meant to be carried with us, to remain as memories that shape us in ways we can't always explain. I learned to make peace with the idea that my love for Alex, though unfinished, was still a part of who I was, a part of the story I carried with me. And as I looked back on my life, I felt a sense of gratitude for the love we had shared, even if it had been brief, even if it had been incomplete. Somewhere in the quiet spaces of my heart, Alex would always remain, a whisper of what might have been, a memory that lived on in the corners of my mind. And though I had let him go, though I had moved forward with my life, I knew that he would always be with me, a part of me forever, as enduring as the love that had brought us together. Years passed quietly and steadily as life often does. My days fell into a gentle rhythm, softened by the familiarity of routine, and by the small moments that defined our lives together. Daniel and I grew old side by side, our lives intertwining in ways that I hadn't fully appreciated until then. We faced the moments of joy and hardship that every couple inevitably encounters, learning to navigate the losses and triumphs that marked our journey together. Our bond, while quieter and perhaps less passionate than it had once been, was solid and unshakable, built on years of shared memories, trust, and understanding. But in the quietest moments, those rare, solitary times when I found myself alone with my thoughts, I still felt a lingering ache, a whisper of something lost. It wasn't a regret exactly, nor was it dissatisfaction with the life I'd chosen. Instead, it was a soft, bittersweet memory, one that felt as much a part of me as my own heartbeat. As time wore on, I stopped expecting to hear from Alex. After that one letter, that unexpected reminder that he, too, remembered that he, too, had carried a piece of me with him, there had been nothing else. Perhaps he had moved on, found someone who could fill the space that I could never fully occupy. Or maybe he had learned, as I had, to let go of the idea of what might have been. Either way, he had become a part of my past, woven into the fabric of my memories, but no longer a presence in my day-to-day life. In many ways, I made peace with it. I learned to look back on our time together with gratitude instead of longing, to see it as a chapter that had shaped me, that had given me a deeper understanding of myself and of the complexity of love. I held those memories close like old photographs tucked away in a drawer, quiet, precious, untouched by time. I found comfort in the knowledge that some loves are meant to be carried with us, that they don't have to be fully realized to have meaning. As the years passed, my life with Daniel continued in its steady way. We celebrated milestones together, our anniversary, our children's successes, and eventually the arrival of our first grandchild. The joy of watching my children grow, of seeing them find their own paths, filled my heart with a sense of fulfillment and purpose. And through it all, Daniel remained by my side, our love transforming into something gentle and enduring, a bond that had grown from the shared history of a lifetime spent together. One evening, many years after Alex had written to me, Daniel and I were sitting on our porch, watching the sun set over the quiet neighborhood. The air was cool, carrying with it the faint scent of autumn leaves, and we sat in comfortable silence, wrapped in the warmth of each other's presence. I looked at him then, at the man I had chosen, the man who had been my partner, my confidant, my anchor through so much of life's journey. His face was lined with age, his hair speckled with gray, but his eyes held the same kindness, the same steady warmth that had drawn me to him all those years ago. In that moment, a sudden rush of gratitude overwhelmed me. I realized how much I had been given, how deeply I had been loved, even if our love had lacked the intensity or the passion of that other connection I had once shared. Daniel's love had been a constant, a steady flame that had carried me through the years, providing a sense of home and belonging that I hadn't fully appreciated until that very moment. As we sat there, I reached over and took his hand, feeling the familiar warmth of his skin, the roughness that came from years of hard work. He looked at me with a gentle smile, his thumb brushing over my knuckles in a way that felt both intimate and comforting. And for the first time in a long while, I felt the weight of that old memory, that lingering connection to Alex, lift just a little. Perhaps it was age, or perhaps it was the knowledge that I had chosen a life filled with love, even if it hadn't been the love I had once imagined for myself. But in that quiet moment, sitting beside Daniel as the sun dipped below the horizon, I felt a sense of peace settle over me, a soft acceptance of the choices I had made and the life I had lived. The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and challenges, and eventually, Daniel and I grew too old to manage our home on our own. We moved into a smaller place, a cozy apartment in a retirement community, where we could be closer to our children and grandchildren. It was a simpler life, one filled with visits from family, shared meals, and the companionship of neighbors who had also lived long, full lives. One day, as I was sorting through old boxes in our new apartment, I came across the letter Alex had written to me so many years before. I had kept it, tucked away in the back of a drawer, untouched and unread since the day I had first received it. I opened it carefully, feeling a wave of nostalgia wash over me as I read his familiar words. The quiet confession of a love that had never been fully realized. A love that had remained hidden in the spaces between our lives. Reading his words, I felt a bittersweet ache, a reminder of the life we might have shared. The love that had once seemed so close and yet so impossibly far away. But instead of feeling sorrow, I felt a quiet gratitude, for him, for the memories we had shared, and for the knowledge that I had been loved deeply, even if our paths had ultimately led us in different directions. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the drawer, feeling a sense of closure that I hadn't known I needed. Alex had been a part of me, a chapter of my story that had shaped me in ways I would never fully understand. But in the end, he was a memory, a part of my past that I could look back on with both fondness and peace. As I closed the drawer, I felt a familiar warmth at my side, and I turned to see Daniel standing there, his eyes filled with the same gentle understanding that had been his gift to me all these years. He didn't ask about the letter, didn't question the emotions he must have seen in my eyes. Instead, he reached for my hand, his touch steady and reassuring, a reminder of the love that had carried me through a lifetime. And in that moment, I knew that I had found exactly what I had been searching for all along. A love that was real, enduring, and mine. A love that had stood the test of time, that had weathered the storms of life, and that had, in its quiet, unassuming way, filled my heart with a sense of belonging and peace. Some loves, I realized, are meant to be remembered, cherished as a beautiful piece of our past. But others, the ones that endure, are meant to be lived, to be held close, to grow alongside us as we move through life. And as I looked at Daniel, my partner, my friend, my love, I knew that I had been given something precious, something that would stay with me until the end. In the end, I had loved deeply, imperfectly, and fully, and for that I was grateful. As the years continued to pass, Daniel and I settled into the gentle rhythm of our later years, with a sense of contentment that felt both earned and fragile. Our days were filled with familiar routines, simple joys, and the quiet satisfaction of having lived a full life together. We spent our mornings sipping coffee on the small balcony of our apartment, watching the sun rise and talking about the news, the lives of our children, and the little memories we shared that had come to mean so much. There was a sense of ease between us that I hadn't fully understood in my younger years, a comfort that came from knowing each other so well, from having shared so many years and so many memories. But as Daniel's health began to decline, my heart felt the first subtle pangs of a different kind of sorrow, one that was woven with both love and fear. It started with small things, a cough that lingered, moments of forgetfulness that he laughed off as old age catching up with him, or days when he seemed more tired than usual. At first, I brushed these things aside, not wanting to believe that they could be anything more than the usual effects of growing older. But as time went on, it became clear that something more serious was at play. Doctor's appointments and tests followed, each one confirming the slow, inevitable truth that Daniel's health was failing. It was a hard reality to face, and as I sat with him during the long hours of waiting rooms and treatments, I found myself grappling with the idea of loss in a way I had never had to before. Daniel, my steady anchor, my partner through all the highs and lows, was slipping away. The man who had been there for me through every moment of my life, who had shared in every joy and sorrow, was now fading before my eyes. I did my best to care for him, to make our days as comfortable and peaceful as possible. I held his hand when he grew weak, listened to his stories even when he began repeating them, and sat beside him in the quiet hours of the night when sleep escaped us both. Our love had grown into something beyond words, something that felt both heartbreakingly beautiful and unbearably fragile. One evening, as I sat by his bedside, Daniel took my hand in his grip weak but still full of the warmth I had known all these years. He looked at me with a soft smile, his eyes clouded but still holding that familiar glint of kindness that had always been his. "I've been thinking a lot lately," he said quietly, his voice raspy. "About us, about all we've been through. And I just want you to know, I've had a good life, Liz. You've given me a good life." His words pierced through me, filling my heart with a bittersweet ache. I leaned closer, squeezing his hand, feeling the emotions well up inside me, the gratitude and love and sorrow all mingling together. "You've given me a good life too, Daniel," I whispered, my voice catching. "I couldn't have asked for a better partner. You've been everything to me." He looked at me then, his gaze steady despite the frailty of his body, and I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, a quiet understanding, a deep knowing that went beyond words. It was as if he could see every part of me, even the parts one had tried so hard to hide. "I always knew there was a part of you that carried something else," he said softly, his voice barely audible. "A piece of your heart that belonged to someone else. I think I always knew about Alex." The words hung in the air between us, gentle and unhurried, and I felt my breath catch, a surge of surprise and sorrow flooding through me. I had never told him, never dared to voice the truth of that hidden part of myself, and yet here he was, acknowledging it with a quiet acceptance that was more loving than anything I could have imagined. "Daniel, I'm so sorry," I whispered, tears slipping down my cheeks. "I never wanted to hurt you. I loved him, yes, but I chose you. I've always chosen you." He gave a small, understanding nod, his thumb brushing softly over my knuckles. "I know, Liz. I've always known. And I've never doubted that you loved me. You've been with me through everything, and that's all that matters. Love is complicated sometimes, and I've been grateful for every moment with you." I felt the weight of his words settle deep within me, filling me with a sense of peace I hadn't realized I needed. He didn't resent me, didn't feel betrayed by the love I had once shared with someone else. Instead, he understood that love, in all its messy, beautiful complexity, could hold space for more than one person. His acceptance felt like a gift, a final act of kindness that showed me the true depth of his love. In the weeks that followed, Daniel's health continued to decline, and I stayed by his side, holding his hand, whispering words of love and gratitude, sharing memories of our life together. He passed away on a cool spring morning, his hand in mine, his face peaceful as he took his last breath. The loss left a hollow ache in my heart, a grief that felt both unbearable and beautiful, filled with memories of a life well lived, a love that had sustained me through every season. After his passing, I took time to reflect, to grieve, to let myself feel the full weight of both the love I had lost and the love I had kept hidden. I found solace in the memories of Daniel, in the quiet moments we had shared, in the unwavering support he had given me through everything. He had been my rock, my home, the person who had seen me fully and loved me without reservation, even knowing the parts of me that were tangled with the memories of another. In the quiet months that followed, I reached out to Alex, feeling a need to connect, to share the news of Daniel's passing with someone who had known me so deeply. I sent him a simple letter, telling him about Daniel's last days, about the love and peace that had filled our lives together, and about the quiet acceptance Daniel had shown in those final moments. I didn't expect a response. It had been years since we had last spoken, and I didn't know where life had taken him. But a few weeks later, a letter arrived in the mail. It was from Alex, his words written in the same careful, familiar script that I remembered so well. "Liz," he wrote, "I was deeply saddened to hear about Daniel's passing. I know how much he meant to you, how strong and enduring your love for him was. I wish I could have been there to support you, to share in your grief. But please know that I'm here, that I've thought of you often over the years, and that I've always cherished the part of you that we shared. Some loves remain with us, even when life takes us down different paths. I'll always carry a piece of you with me, just as I know you carry a piece of me." His words brought a soft, bittersweet comfort, a reminder of the life and love we had once shared. And as I read his letter, I felt a quiet peace settle over me, a sense of closure that allowed me to finally let go. I knew now that I had loved fully, deeply, in all the ways that mattered. I had been loved in return by both Alex and Daniel, in different and beautiful ways that had shaped me, filled me, and left me richer for having known them both. As the days turned into years, I continued to carry their memories with me, a quiet reminder of the loves that had marked my life. And as I moved forward, I found a sense of peace, knowing that I had lived fully, had loved and been loved, and that the memories of both men would remain with me always, a part of my story, a part of who I was, and a part of the quiet, beautiful life I had chosen to live. With each passing season, life continued in its gentle, inevitable flow. I found new routines, new ways to fill the spaces that had once been shaped by Daniel's presence. My children and grandchildren became my anchors, their laughter and energy a reminder that life moved forward, even when pieces of our past clung to us in quiet, bittersweet ways. After Daniel's passing, I often felt a kind of quiet solitude, an emptiness that I learned to make peace with. But in this solitude, I also discovered something unexpected, a deep, almost sacred connection to the life I'd lived. As time went on, I spent many quiet hours revisiting memories, sifting through photographs and letters, allowing myself to feel the full depth of both my joys and my regrets. The memories of Daniel brought me comfort, the recollections of our life together filling me with a gratitude so profound it was almost overwhelming. And then there was Alex. In the silence, his memory would come to me unbidden, soft and elusive, like the gentle brush of a feather. I would remember the boy he'd been, the friend who had shared my childhood, the man who had, for a time, stirred a part of my heart I hadn't even known existed. His letters, those few words exchanged so many years apart, remained tucked away in a drawer, a part of my life that I visited rarely but held close, like a quiet treasure. I never saw him again, and yet he was there, a part of me as real as any other memory. One winter evening, as snow fell softly outside, I found myself pulling out those letters again. I reread the familiar words, tracing my fingers over his handwriting, feeling a sense of comfort in the thought that somewhere, he might still think of me from time to time. I wondered where life had taken him, if he'd found the happiness we had both sought in different ways, if he had a family or a quiet, steady love that kept him warm in his own way. I hoped he had. That night I fell asleep with the letters beside me, my heart wrapped in a gentle warmth, a reminder that some loves, even those that never fully bloomed, could leave lasting imprints on our souls. I dreamt of the life I'd lived, of the people who had shaped me, and when I woke I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for years. As I grew older, my own health began to decline. It started in subtle ways, a fatigue that lingered, a few more visits to the doctor than I'd been accustomed to. My children, ever attentive, began to worry, urging me to consider moving in with one of them. Though I resisted at first, clinging to the independence I had cherished for so long, I eventually agreed, knowing that there was comfort in being close to family. I moved into a small room in my daughter's home, where I was surrounded by the warmth of family. My grandchildren, now young adults themselves, would sit with me, listening as I recounted stories from my past, tales of their grandfather, stories of my childhood with Alex. They knew only the innocent parts of those memories, of course, the shared laughter and pranks, the years of friendship that had defined my youth. They would laugh, eyes wide with wonder, as I shared stories of simpler days, of tree forts and summer nights, of love that had remained hidden in the quiet places of my heart. One spring afternoon, as the cherry blossoms bloomed outside, I sat with my granddaughter on the porch, a quilt draped over my lap. She was asking me about love, about how I had known that Daniel was the one, her young face alight with curiosity. I thought carefully before answering, knowing that my answer held decades of quiet understanding, of loves both spoken and unspoken. Love isn't always about one moment, sweetheart, I said softly, looking out at the blooming trees. It's not always a thunderbolt. Sometimes it's quiet, something that grows slowly, like a garden you tend to each day. Your grandfather was that kind of love, a steady, warm presence, a home I could return to no matter where life took me. She nodded, her eyes bright with fascination. Did you ever wonder about other paths, Grandma? She asked, her voice soft, almost hesitant. I smiled, feeling the familiar tug of that hidden part of my heart, the part that still carried Alex with me. I think everyone has moments like that, I said carefully. People who come into our lives and leave a mark, who stay with us even if they're not by our side. There's beauty in that too, in the lives we don't live but keep as part of who we are. She looked thoughtful, her gaze turning to the blossoms as they swayed gently in the breeze. I saw in her a glimmer of myself, a curiosity about love and life, about the complexities of the heart. I hoped that she would carry these stories with her, that she would understand that love didn't have to be perfect or simple to be real and meaningful. As the years continued, my memories became both a comfort and a constant companion. I lived in the quiet moments, cherishing the life I'd built, the love I'd shared, and even the love I'd kept hidden. And when I looked back, I found a deep sense of peace in the understanding that my life had been rich and full, woven together with moments of joy, sorrow, and everything in between. In my final days, as I grew weaker, I felt surrounded by the presence of those I had loved. Daniel's memory was there, warm and steady, a constant presence that filled my heart with gratitude. And Alex's memory was there too, a soft, bittersweet echo of a love that had been both fleeting and eternal, a love that had shaped me in ways no one else could fully understand. On a quiet evening with my family nearby, I felt a gentle sense of release. As I closed my eyes, I saw Daniel's face, his familiar, kind smile, and I felt the warmth of his hand in mine, just as I had so many times before. And somewhere in the distance, in a quiet corner of my heart, I felt Alex too, his presence a soft, reassuring reminder of a love that had spanned a lifetime, hidden and yet as real as any other. As I drifted off, I knew that I had loved deeply and been loved in return, that my life had been a tapestry of beautiful, complicated moments that had made me who I was. And in that final breath, I carried them both with me, the steady love that had been my foundation, and the quiet love that had been my secret joy. In the end, I found peace, knowing that love had filled my life in all its forms, that I had been gifted with more than I could ever have hoped for. And as I took that last, gentle step into whatever lay beyond, I knew that I carried those loves with me, bound forever into the fabric of my soul, cherished and eternal.